Racist cop drags black woman out, but she's the covert official assigned to dismantle his command chain. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The sun had already begun its descent, casting long shadows across the city streets. Angela Johnson, a woman of striking calm, walked with purpose toward her car, oblivious to the chaos that would soon unfold. As she reached her vehicle, she paused for a moment, adjusting her blazer, her thoughts occupied with the mission she had been working on for weeks. She wasn't just another woman walking home after a long day. She was an undercover FBI agent, silently gathering intelligence that would soon bring down a network of corrupt officers within the police department. She took a deep breath, appreciating the quiet, unaware of the storm brewing just around the corner. Moments later, the unmistakable sound of a police siren sliced through the air. Angela's calm demeanor did not falter as she turned to see a police cruiser slowly rolling toward her. Officer Brad Sullivan, a man whose face was etched with arrogance, stepped out of the vehicle with an air of authority. He didn't give her a second glance before walking over with a stern expression. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can you step over here for a moment?" he demanded. Angela didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her posture poised, her eyes locked on his as he approached. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Sullivan's gaze flickered over her briefly, clearly irritated by her calmness. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You seem out of place. What are you really doing here?" Angela didn't respond immediately. She knew that nothing she said would change his attitude. Instead, she stood silently, knowing that every word she said would be twisted, every gesture scrutinized. Sullivan's suspicion grew. "Are you carrying anything illegal?" he asked. "Do you mind if I search your bag?" Angela raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The officer's eyes narrowed as he grew increasingly irritated by her lack of fear. He motioned to another officer who was standing by the cruiser, signaling for him to come closer. With a quick glance, Sullivan gestured for Angela to step away from her car. Angela remained composed, keeping her gaze steady and unfazed. The surrounding crowd, who had gathered from nearby shops, began to whisper, some watching with judgment in their eyes, others with curiosity. Sullivan, sensing the growing tension, grabbed Angela's arm without warning and began pulling her away from the vehicle. The crowd stirred, their whispers growing louder. Angela could feel the weight of their stares, but she didn't react. She knew better than to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. As Sullivan continued to drag her toward his car, something unexpected happened. The air seemed to change. There was a sudden shift, a moment where the crowd's attention shifted from Angela to the officer. A powerful voice cut through the murmur, and suddenly, everything seemed to stop. "Officer Sullivan." The voice rang out, and the crowd parted. A man, tall and composed, walked toward them with an air of authority. It was Angela's superior, a senior FBI agent, who had been tracking Sullivan's actions for months. He had been waiting for this exact moment. As he reached the scene, he revealed his badge, and the shift in the crowd's energy was palpable. Sullivan froze, confusion and realization slowly dawning on him. Angela, still calm and unwavering, stepped aside, allowing her superior to take control of the situation. The officer, once so sure of his own power, stood frozen as the full weight of his mistake came crashing down. The truth was now undeniable. Angela wasn't just any woman. She was an undercover agent assigned to expose the very corruption he had been a part of. Sullivan's world was about to come crashing down. Justice had arrived, and with it, the end of his career. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Officer Sullivan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the sudden shift in the situation. The tall figure who had just appeared was no stranger to him. It was Agent Daniel Harris, a senior officer with the FBI, known for his no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. His reputation alone was enough to command attention. Sullivan's hands twitched nervously, the weight of his actions now sinking in. He had been so sure of his position, so confident that the system would protect him. But now, standing in front of him was a force he could not ignore. Agent Harris calmly approached, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Officer Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Sullivan swallowed hard, his confidence rapidly evaporating. Angela, who had remained composed throughout the exchange, could feel the tension lifting as the situation began to turn in her favor. "What seems to be the issue here?" Harris asked, his tone polite but firm. Sullivan struggled to find words, his earlier bravado now replaced with uncertainty. I thought she was acting suspicious," Sullivan stammered, clearly trying to justify his actions. Harris glanced at Angela, who nodded slightly, signaling her readiness to allow the truth to come out. She had known this moment was inevitable, but the timing had to be perfect. "Suspicious?" Harris asked, raising an eyebrow. "What exactly about her behavior made you think she was suspicious, officer?" Sullivan's face flushed as he tried to form an explanation. He knew he couldn't hide his racism behind flimsy accusations any longer. She wasn't acting like the people who normally walk through here," Sullivan muttered, his voice faltering. The words felt weak even to him. Harris let the silence hang for a moment, allowing Sullivan to squirm under the pressure. "I see," Harris said slowly. "Well, Officer Sullivan, you've made a grave mistake. This woman, as you so wrongly assumed, is not someone to be treated with suspicion. In fact, she's one of the key agents working on the investigation into your very department." Sullivan's face drained of color as the realization hit him. He had just accosted a fellow officer, someone he had no idea was working undercover to expose the very corruption within his ranks. The absurdity of it all hit him like a ton of bricks. What? Sullivan stammered, his voice barely a whisper now. "Angela Johnson," Harris continued, his voice cold and final, "is an FBI agent. You've just made a very costly mistake." Angela finally spoke, her voice calm yet firm, every word cutting through the tension. "Officer Sullivan, I would suggest you reflect on your actions, because the consequences will be much greater than a simple apology." Sullivan, now visibly sweating, stood there in shock, unable to comprehend the enormity of the situation. Harris turned his gaze to the growing crowd, who were now witnessing the unraveling of a story they never expected. "I'll be taking it from here," Harris said, his tone leaving no room for further argument. He motioned for Angela to step forward, and, as she did, she felt the weight of the moment lift off her shoulders. She had completed her mission. Sullivan's arrogance, once so apparent, was now replaced with a cold, hard reality. Angela, though, remained calm, her role in this operation far from over. She knew this was just the beginning of dismantling the network of corruption within the police force, a network that had been protected for far too long. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, murmurs of disbelief filled the air. The officers, who had once been allies in maintaining a corrupt system, were now seeing firsthand what could happen when justice was served. Angela and Harris walked away from the scene, leaving behind a shell-shocked Sullivan. But as they made their way to the car, Angela knew the hardest part was still ahead. The battle to bring down the corruption in the department would take more than just exposing one officer. It would require a full reckoning, and she was ready for it. As Angela and Agent Harris left the scene, the sounds of the crowd murmuring behind them slowly faded away, but the weight of what had just transpired remained. Harris's expression was stern, but there was a sense of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Angela, still processing the events, knew that this moment was only the beginning of a much larger mission. They walked toward the unmarked FBI car parked nearby, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Angela had been under deep cover for months, gathering intel on a network of corrupt police officers who had been abusing their power for years. Sullivan had just been the first piece to fall, But Angela knew that the battle ahead would not be as simple. As I got into the car, Harris spoke first. "You did well back there, Angela. But this is just the tip of the iceberg." Angela nodded, her gaze fixed on the windshield. "I know. Sullivan was just the beginning. There are higher-ups involved, and we need to take them down one by one. But we have to be careful. They're powerful, and they've been covering each other for a long time." Harris sighed, leaning back in his seat. "I've been in this game for a while, and I've never seen corruption run this deep. But you're right. We have to move strategically. If we rush in, we risk alerting them before we're ready. We need more evidence. We need to expose their network completely." Angela's mind raced as she thought about the intricate web of deceit she had uncovered. She had seen firsthand how the system had failed to protect those who needed it most. Sullivan's behavior was just a symptom of a much larger issue, one that had been allowed to fester for far too long. "We need to gather more information. We need to get to the heart of this," Angela said, her voice calm but resolute. Harris nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Agreed. We'll need to bring in more resources, but for now, we keep our heads down. Sullivan will be talking soon enough, and when he does, we'll have more pieces to work with." The drive to their temporary office was quiet, each of them lost in their thoughts. Angela couldn't help but think about how far she had come since joining the FBI. She had seen corruption before, but nothing like this. She had seen firsthand how those in power could abuse their positions, how they could destroy lives without a second thought. But this time, things were different. This time, she was part of the team that was going to bring them down. When they arrived at the office, Angela and Harris immediately got to work. They sat down at their desks, surrounded by stacks of files and evidence. It was a familiar sight, but this time, there was a new sense of urgency in the air. Angela knew that every minute counted. They were running out of time, and the higher-ups in the department were becoming more aware of the investigation. But she was determined to see it through. As she opened a file containing details on one of the officers in the network, she felt a surge of resolve. This was her mission. She wasn't just going to expose the corruption. She was going to make sure it ended, once and for all. The next few weeks would be critical. They would need to carefully piece together every shred of evidence, every report, every tip they had gathered over the months. But Angela was ready. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She knew the risks, but she also knew that justice had to prevail. The fight ahead would be difficult, but she was prepared. As Harris looked over his notes, he glanced up at Angela. "We'll get them, Angela. We just have to stay focused. And we will bring this down, piece by piece." Angela met his gaze with a quiet determination. "We will," she said, her voice steady and firm. "And we'll do it right." The wheels were already turning, and as the days passed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Angela and Harris were about to uncover a network of corruption that would shake the very foundations of the department. The fight was just beginning, but Angela was ready to take on whatever came next. The following weeks passed in a blur of constant meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Angela and Agent Harris worked tirelessly, poring over files, connecting dots, and slowly but surely, the larger picture of the corruption within the police department began to come into focus. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how deep the problem ran. Sullivan's fall had been just the beginning. The officers involved in the network were far more entrenched, their connections stretching through the department like a web that had taken years to construct. As the investigation progressed, Angela found herself in countless late-night sessions, her eyes red from exhaustion, but her resolve stronger than ever. It wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about ensuring that the system would be held accountable for its actions. One afternoon, as Angela sat in front of a large whiteboard covered in photos, names, and connections, Harris walked into the room. He looked tired, but there was a spark in his eye that suggested something important had happened. "We've got something," he said, his voice low but urgent. Angela looked up, her focus sharpening. "What is it?" Harris took a deep breath and grabbed a file from his desk. "We just got a lead on Detective Mark Daniels. He's been tied to several suspicious activities. There's evidence that he's been working closely with Sullivan and others. We've already identified. But there's more. He's linked to a few high-profile cases that have been swept under the rug. If we can tie him to those, it'll give us the leverage we need. Angela's pulse quickened. This could be the break they needed. Daniels was a key player in the network, and bringing him down would expose the corruption like nothing else. She looked at the photos on the board again, her mind racing. "What's the plan?" she asked. Harris met her gaze with determination. "We keep this quiet. No one can know about this lead. We'll monitor Daniels, follow his every move, and gather as much information as we can. Once we have enough, we make our move." Angela nodded. The mission was becoming more dangerous by the day, but there was no turning back now. They had to stay focused, keep their heads down, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Over the next few days, they shadowed Daniels, watching his every move with precision. The more they observed, the more they realized how calculated he was. He was always a step ahead, making it clear that he had been part of the network for a long time. But Angela wasn't about to let him slip through their fingers. They were getting closer. One evening, as Angela sat at her desk, she received a call from Harris. "Angela, it's time," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "We got everything we need. Let's take him down." Her heart raced as she grabbed her jacket and headed out the door. It was finally happening. The moment they had been working toward was here. As Angela and Harris made their way to Daniel's location, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was it. The next few hours would determine everything. The team was already in position, and Angela's thoughts were clear. They had to be swift, precise, and relentless. No room for mistakes. As they approached the building where Daniels was meeting with several other officers involved in the network, Angela's mind sharpened. She had done her part. Now it was time for justice to prevail. Harris gave her a brief nod, signaling that it was time. With one last deep breath, Angela stepped forward, ready to take the final step toward dismantling the corrupt system that had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. Agent Harris's signal was all Angela needed, but instead of rushing forward, she allowed the moment to settle, letting the weight of the mission wash over her. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic, a reminder that the city continued moving even as the truth was moments away from surfacing. Angela stood still for a second, grounding herself. She remembered the months spent undercover, the quiet nights studying files, the long days blending into crowds, and the countless moments where she had been forced to endure disrespect from the very officer she was investigating. All of it had led to this precise moment. As she stepped forward, her expression remained composed, her movements measured. She approached the entrance of the dimly lit building where Detective Daniels and his associates were meeting. The soft glow of the hallway lights cast long shadows on the walls, adding to the tension building within her. She felt no fear, only clarity. This was her purpose, and she was ready. The team positioned themselves nearby, maintaining a professional distance to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Harris moved beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He glanced at her briefly, and she understood the message behind his calm expression. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Angela nodded subtly and continued forward. Inside the building, muffled voices drifted through the hallway. Angela recognized one of the voices immediately. Daniels had a distinctive tone, confident and commanding, the kind that came from years of believing he would always be protected. Angela paused near the doorway, listening carefully as she steadied her breath. Every detail mattered. Every sound helped her understand the dynamic inside the room. She looked to Harris, who gave her a slight nod, letting her take the lead. This was her mission, after all. Angela stepped into the doorway, her posture straight, her presence undeniable. The officers inside turned toward her, their expressions shifting from confusion to something far more telling. Daniels' eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Angela held that gaze, letting the silence speak for her. It was a silence that carried truth, authority, and the end of denial. Daniels attempted to regain his composure, straightening his collar as though trying to salvage control of the moment. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp but uncertain. Angela's response was calm, unwavering. "Detective Daniels, you and I need to talk." He looked around the room, clearly unsettled by the presence of the FBI team standing in the hallway behind her. For the first time, he seemed aware that the world he had built around himself might be cracking. "About what?" he asked, trying to sound unfazed. Angela stepped further into the room. Her voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable edge of finality in her words. "About your involvement in the network we have been investigating, and about the choices you have been making for a very long time." A hush fell over the room. Danielle's associates exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the shift in power. The tension was palpable, but Angela never broke eye contact with Daniels. It was a silent confrontation, one built not on anger, but on truth. Truth he had avoided for years. Harris stepped forward now, his calm voice reinforcing Angela's presence. "We have enough evidence to proceed, Daniels. This is the moment you will want to listen carefully." Daniels opened his mouth as if to argue, but the resolve in Angela's expression stopped him cold. She was not just another investigator. She was the person who had tracked his steps, understood his patterns, and pieced together the puzzle he thought was unbreakable. And at that moment, Daniels realized something he had never imagined. The system he had relied on to protect him was no longer on his side. Angela held his gaze, letting the truth settle. The walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble, and he understood that nothing he said now would change the course of what was coming. The room remained silent, heavy with the weight of consequence. Angela took one slow breath, steady and sure. Justice was no longer a distant possibility. It was here, standing in front of Daniels, ready to unfold. Angela watched as Daniels stood motionless, his mind racing to process the unfolding situation. His usually calm and confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by a clear sense of panic. He glanced at his associates, their expressions a mixture of fear and uncertainty. The reality of the situation was sinking in fast. Angela felt a calm determination settle within her. She had prepared for this moment for months, and now it was unfolding exactly as it should. She could see the cracks in Daniel's facade. The moment he realized there was no way out. She stepped forward, maintaining eye contact with him, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the truth. "You've been operating under the assumption that you're untouchable, that no one would ever expose the corruption you're involved in." Daniels opened his mouth as if to protest, but Angela silenced him with a single, measured gesture. "It's over, Daniels. We've been gathering evidence for months, and now we have everything we need to bring you down. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the system you've been protecting, the lives you've ruined." She watched his eyes flicker with the first signs of true fear, but she didn't feel any satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. She turned slightly, allowing Harris to step forward, his voice calm, but cutting through the tension in the room. "You're not getting away with this, Daniels. We have your connections, the files, the conversations. We've been following your every move. You're going to answer for your actions." The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in on Daniels as the weight of his misdeeds became undeniable. He was cornered, and there was no escape. Angela could almost feel the shift in the air as the finality of the moment settled over them. Daniels shifted his weight, trying to gather his composure, but it was clear his usual tactics of intimidation and manipulation had no power here. "You think this is it? You think you could just walk in here and take me down?" Daniel spat, his voice rising in frustration. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. I'm not the one you should be worried about." Angela stayed calm, refusing to let his words affect her. She had heard all before, empty threats from those who thought they were above the law. "This isn't about what you think anymore," she replied quietly, her voice unwavering. "This is about what we know, and what we know is enough." The seconds seemed to stretch as the room remained still. Daniel stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, his breath quickening as the realization continued to sink in. He was powerless now, exposed for everything he had tried to hide. Angela took a deep breath, allowing the moment to resonate. "You've been part of a network of officers who have been abusing their power for far too long, and it's not just going to end with you. We're taking this all the way to the top. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his mouth opening to speak, but he was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from the hallway. Harris turned to signal the others, and in that moment, the weight of the situation hit Daniels full force. He could feel the shift. The network he had been a part of was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His arrogance and confidence had led him to believe he was untouchable. But now, standing in front of Angela and Harris, he knew he was nothing more than a cog in a system about to come crashing down. Angela didn't need to say more. She had already said everything that mattered. The justice he had been so sure would never come was now within reach, and no amount of pleading, no empty threats could change that. As the door opened behind them, revealing the rest of the team, Daniels finally understood that his days of power and manipulation were over. The investigation had reached its final stage, and now it was only a matter of time before everything he had worked to protect would be exposed. Angela turned toward Harris, giving him a small nod. They had done it. The system was beginning to break, and soon the truth would be revealed for all to see. The following morning, the weight of what had happened the night before still hung in the air as Angela and Harris sat at their desks, reviewing the progress they had made. The interrogation of Daniels had been a crucial turning point, but they both knew the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Angela's phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from one of the other agents working the case. The higher-ups are starting to feel the pressure. We need to move faster. The last thing we want is for them to make a run for it. Angela read the message twice, her expression steady. Harris noticed the shift in her demeanor. He knew what the message meant. It was time to take things to the next level. We can't let them slip away. We need to keep pushing, Harris said, his voice resolute. Angela nodded, standing up from her chair. Let's move, then. We'll start with the evidence we have on Daniels. We need to make sure the rest of the network knows we're coming for them. They won't go down without a fight. The urgency in her voice wasn't lost on Harris. He grabbed his jacket, preparing for the next phase. They knew that the officers involved in the corrupt network wouldn't go down easily, but they also knew the truth was on their side, and that was all they needed. As they left the office, Angela felt the familiar tension settle in her chest. The next few hours were crucial. They had to move quickly and carefully, cutting off every escape route before the network could collapse in on itself. Their first stop was a local warehouse, where Daniels had been meeting with other officers from the department. They had intercepted messages confirming that more deals and conversations were taking place there. As they arrived, the warehouse loomed in front of them, its dark exterior a stark contrast to the bustling city around it. Harris turned to Angela, his eyes scanning the surroundings. This is it. We're getting close. Angela nodded, her focus sharp. We need to be prepared for anything. Stay on your toes. The team quickly spread out, positioning themselves strategically around the perimeter of the warehouse. Angela's pulse quickened as the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Harris signaled for her to follow him, and they moved toward the entrance, their steps synchronized. As they entered, the warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sound being their footsteps on the concrete floor. Angela could feel the tension building with every passing second. They were getting closer to uncovering everything. The shelves of boxes and crates in the warehouse stood like silent witnesses, holding secrets that had been hidden for far too long. Angela and Harris made their way deeper into the building, following the faint sound of voices ahead. The closer they got, the more their surroundings seemed to close in on them, the air thick with the weight of what was at stake. When they rounded the corner, they finally saw the group. Several officers, including some of the ones they had already identified in the network, were standing around a table, speaking in low voices. Angela's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She motioned for the team to move. In. Now, she whispered. In an instant, the agents surrounded the group, their presence undeniable. The officers froze, eyes widening in shock as they realized they had been caught. For a brief moment, there was silence, then a murmur of disbelief. Angela stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You're under investigation for corruption and abuse of power. You have the right to remain silent. but anything you say can and will be used against you. The officers looked at each other, some attempting to speak, but Angela held her ground. There was no turning back now. The investigation was no longer a quiet operation. It had become a full-scale reckoning. Harris moved in alongside her, his eyes scanning the group. "We've got the evidence, and we're not leaving until you answer for everything." The officers stood in stunned silence, their guilt written all over their faces. The truth was out, and there was no escape for them now. The warehouse, once a place of secrecy, was now the site of a pivotal moment. Angela had no doubt that the network would be dismantled, piece by piece. But there was still much work to do. As they rounded up the officers, Angela allowed herself a moment to breathe. This was the moment they had been working toward, but she knew the fight was far from over. The corruption they had uncovered ran deep, and it would take time to unravel every thread. But they had taken the first step, and for the first time in a long while, Angela felt the weight of the system begin to shift. Justice was closer than it had ever been before. The operation at the warehouse had been a turning point, but as Angela and Harris watched the officers being taken into custody, they both knew this wasn't the end. The corrupt network they were dismantling was still vast, and many pieces of the puzzle were yet to be uncovered. They had made progress, but the deeper layers of the system remained hidden in the shadows. Angela spent the next few days reviewing the evidence with her team, piecing together the remaining threads. Each new discovery revealed more about the depth of the corruption, and Angela felt the weight of the responsibility growing heavier with each passing hour. It was clear now that the network wasn't just limited to a few bad officers. The corruption was woven into the very fabric of the department, reaching higher than they had originally thought. But Angela remained focused. The fight was long, but she had come too far to back down now. Harris walked into her office, his face grim but determined. "We've got more intel," he said, setting a thick file on her desk. Angela looked up, her eyes narrowing. "What's the new lead?" Harris flipped open the file. "There's a high-ranking official, someone who has been pulling strings behind the scenes. We've been able to track down communications, linking them to Daniels and several other officers." Angela's heart raced as she scanned the papers. This was the breakthrough they needed. If they could tie this official to the network, it would bring the whole operation crashing down. "This is it," she said, her voice low with determination. "We go after them next." Harris nodded. "We have to be careful. This person has a lot of influence. If they get wind of what we're doing, they'll go into hiding and we'll lose our chance." Angela stood up, her resolve strengthening. "We don't have time to waste. We move quickly. I want every piece of information we have on them. This is the key to bringing the whole system down." Over the next few days, Angela and Harris worked tirelessly, gathering the final pieces of evidence they needed. They reached out to trusted contacts within the department, slowly building a profile of the official they were after. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how much was at stake. This wasn't just about punishing a few corrupt officers. It was about dismantling a system that had been broken for far too long. Finally, after days of careful planning, Angela and Harris were ready. The official's location had been confirmed, and they had everything in place to make the arrest. Angela felt a rush of adrenaline as she geared up for what was to come. This was it, the final step. The operation would either expose everything or fall apart entirely. As they arrived at the building where the official was located, Angela felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for. She and Harris, along with their team, moved swiftly and silently, their steps coordinated, their focus unwavering. They knew what was at stake. Inside the building, Angela's heart pounded as they approached the office. The official, unaware of their arrival, continued with his day-to-day routine, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. Angela and Harris moved into position, signaling to the team that it was time. The door to the office opened, and Angela stepped inside, her presence commanding. The official looked up in surprise, his face quickly shifting from confusion to realization. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. Angela didn't respond immediately. Instead, She allowed the silence to stretch, letting the gravity of the moment settle in. "You're under arrest for your involvement in a criminal network within the department," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. The official's expression faltered, the shock of the moment clearly hitting him hard. He tried to protest, but his words faltered. Angela had seen it before. The moment when someone who thought they were untouchable realized the game was up. "You have the right to remain silent," she continued. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." As the official was taken into custody, Angela felt a surge of relief. It wasn't just the arrest that mattered. It was what it represented. The fall of a corrupt system that had abused its power for far too long. As they walked out of the building, Angela allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. They had done it. The mission was complete, but the fight for justice would never truly end. There would always be more to uncover, more to fight for. But for now, Angela knew they had made a difference, and that was enough. Weeks passed after the final arrest, and although Angela had successfully exposed a massive web of corruption, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly over. She spent long hours reflecting on the impact of their work, but she knew the fight for justice would never be fully complete. The task force had made significant strides, but there were still so many layers to uncover in the department. The network of officers, now taken down, had been just one part of a larger system that continued to protect its own. But Angela was relentless. Each day, she found herself driven by the knowledge that there would always be more to do. The city had been rocked by the scandal, and the police department was scrambling to regain its integrity. But the cracks in the system were too wide to repair overnight. Angela continued to work with the team, carefully reviewing the testimonies from the officers they had arrested. Every bit of information was vital, every piece of evidence a potential lead that could uncover even more. The public's reaction had been one of shock and disbelief, but there were also voices of hope rising from the community. They felt as though they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that could finally bring true reform to a broken system. But as the dust settled, Angela couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence around her. There were no more dramatic arrests, no more public reveals. The faces of the officers they had worked with were all unfamiliar now, and she knew that many of them would have to live with the consequences of their actions for the rest of their lives. Angela knew, too, that there would always be those who would try to protect the corrupt. It was a constant, quiet fight. One night, as Angela sat in her office, reviewing case files and preparing for another round of interviews with witnesses, Harris walked in. He had a look of determination on his face, and Angela could tell that there was something he needed to discuss. "We've made a breakthrough," he said. Angela looked up, her interest piqued. "What's happened?" Harris placed a folder on her desk and opened it to reveal several photos and notes. "We found more. A link between some of the higher-ups who were overlooked in the first sweep. We've been able to track down more meetings, more communications. It looks like this goes deeper than we thought." Angela's heart raced as she studied the new evidence. She had suspected as much. She had known that the corruption they had uncovered was just a small fraction of what was truly happening behind closed doors. But now, with these new leads, it was clear that the investigation had only scratched the surface. "We're going to need more resources," Angela said, her voice firm. "We can't afford to miss anything now." Harris nodded. "I agree. But this time, we need to be smarter. We can't risk tipping anyone off. We need to move cautiously and strategically." Angela took a deep breath. She had been prepared for this. She had known that the work would never be easy, but seeing the faces of those she had helped bring to justice, hearing the community speak out about their desire for change, filled her with a quiet sense of pride. "Let's keep going," she said quietly. "We've already made a difference, but we won't stop until every last bit of corruption is rooted out." Harris looked at her with respect, his admiration for her determination clear in his eyes. "You're right," he said. "We'll do this together." As Angela looked at the evidence before her, she knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But she was ready. She had taken down one system of corruption, but there were always more to fight. And with each step forward, she knew they were creating a future where justice would no longer be an afterthought. The journey was just beginning, but Angela was prepared for whatever came next.